Hello, everybody. It's me, Breanna. Today I am joined by my co host and friend, Sam. And you are listening to episode 1 of Unnamed Podcast. We couldn't
Unnamed
decide on a name.
podcast.
We couldn't decide on a name. So hopefully this will have a name by the time it's actually published. But in the moment of recording this, we don't know. So you can find this unnamed podcast that will be in the frame by frame feed. You can find us at youtube.com/savethegamemedia and podcast services. Again, under the frame by frame name. If you want to show some extra love to Save the Game Media and get early access to all of the content and make Kevin suffer, which is the best part, you can find us at patreon.com/savethegamemedia. We would love your support. You can just do $1 to get all the post shows, and then it's $5 to make Kevin suffer, which, if I do say so myself, is worth the $5.
Worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that I was telling my brother because he was asking me, like, he's like, "Oh, so like, how much do you get paid for like the podcasts?" And I was like, "So about that, we're not making any money." And the Patreon just goes into like funds for like equipment and stuff like that. So we don't really get any money out of it. And in fact, I think I'm the highest supporter of our patron. I'm like $25. So I am in fact paying money to be on the podcast.
That's
So,
it. That's why you're here, Brie. You're here to carry
is.
the rest of the team.
That's exactly what's happening. No, I liked it that much because if it was like a goal that we wanted to meet for everybody to do their shows, like the leftovers and comic book club and all of that. And they were like Patreon goals, and I knew everybody really wanted to do them, so I just put enough money so it reached the goal. So that's how that happened. But yeah. Before we get started today, we're going to be chatting about Iron Man, as I'm sure you could tell from the description, or title or whatever. But before we get started with that, how are you and what have you been watching?
Ooh, I'm okay. I'm I'm I've had a rough day of recording in terms of work and dealing with the recovery from my back surgery.
Thought you were
But
going to
other
say
than
dealing with Breanna.
that too, but that's an unspoken thing. That's just
Oh,
it's something I always
my
have to
bad.
deal with. So
Yeah.
what have I been watching? Not a lot, to be fair. I've been, as I often am, very consumed with my work. The only thing I have watched is The Last of Us, of course, as everybody on the planet should be doing. I literally earlier today, day of recording, the 13th of March, to timestamp it for everyone. I watched the finale earlier today with my family and thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought they stuck the landing. As far as I'm aware, there may or may not be a spoiler cast discussion of The Last of Us at some point. It might be up by the time this goes live, depending on when this goes live. But you can look out for that, I'm sure. I think that's it. Have I seen anything else? I mean, I guess I've seen Iron Man, but I'm not sure that counts.
I don't think that counts.
Unless it does. No. How are you? And what have you watched?
I'm doing well. I'm a little bit tired. We are working on some like content behind the scenes, and it has all fallen in my lap, which is okay. I'm not mad about that. But yesterday I ended up editing from about 2 p.m. until like 1 a.m. And then after that, like I was having a really hard time falling asleep. And then when I fall asleep at like 4:30 or 5 in the morning, I then kept waking up. And I was like, oh, people messaged me. So I would get up and just like reply to messages and then be awake for a little bit and then go back to sleep. I think I did that like 3 or 4 times. And then I slept until like eventually like 11 a.m. So
Okay. Work out that
Chaotic.
sleep schedule.
as,
Yeah.
as we were chatting about earlier. What have I been watching? I've been trying to catch up. So I've been crocheting because I now have 4 projects I'm working on for crocheting. So I ended up buying like a lot of yarn because it was on sale. And so now I just have like piles of yarn in my room. And so I'm trying to not get rid of the yarn, but like do something with it. So I've been crocheting a lot. And then while I crochet, I've been trying to catch up to anime. So I'm almost, for people that watch anime, I almost caught up on Eminence in Shadow. That one's really solid show. I did catch up on Tomo-chan, and I caught up on the Magical Girl Revolution and her something, I don't, assistant. I don't remember the full name. It's a really long name. Those are the ones I'm caught up on. I'm almost caught up on Ice Guy, and I can't remember the full name of that one either. But yeah, I've just kind of been trying to catch up on the cozy romances because I feel like that's kind of what I needed in my life this last week. Just something cozy. So that's what I've been doing and watching. I have been watching House of Cards, but that has been put on hold for just a tiny bit because that is a stressful show. And when I'm stressed out, it's not helpful to watch a stressful show. So yeah. Especially when people lie to you about it.
I don't know what you're possibly inferring with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know either.
I'm a completely straight and narrow, truthful guy.
Yeah, you definitely didn't lie to me about one of the characters being around for a long time in the show and about how you were interested to see how I felt about their character arc, and then they literally die.
Well, I mean, I suppose technically she sort of kind of arced.
Yeah, you said over the course of the
from
entire show. You said over the next few seasons is actually what you said. I better go take a screenshot of that message before you go and edit it.
Yeah, I mean you're right, but if I had said she'd taken a little arc from the side of a platform to not, then that would have maybe taken away from the
I'm gonna be honest with you. I think it definitely added to the shock factor for me. It was like
there you go.
I don't know if I've ever been that purely shocked. Actually, no, I have. Madoka Magica. If you've seen that, there's something that happens in the show, and yeah, it's a very shocking show. So that's probably the one I'm most been shocked, but that's probably second.
There you go. You're welcome.
I'm sure that's exactly what you were intending. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with chatting about Iron Man. So we're just going to start off with some spoiler-free general thoughts. Just to kind of explain to everybody, I have seen this movie in theaters like when it first came out. And then I've seen The Incredible Hulk, I think is the name of the movie. And that is it. That is all of the Marvel that I've seen. And I watched those when they came out. And I don't really like superheroes besides My Hero Academia. So this is going to be an interesting experiment to see if I can get into Marvel because I love seeing everybody so happy and excited about it. I want to, even if I'm not as happy and excited as everybody else, I want to be able to understand what everybody's talking about. So this is a little experiment to see if we can get into Marvel in general. So,
and act as a gateway for others to maybe if we can convince you, Brie, maybe other people can be convinced as well.
Maybe because
I'm essentially trying to make both you and the people watching join a cult. That's what I'm doing.
Yes, I have escaped one cult and into another.
Yeah, join us.
Join
us.
Okay, so let's go into some. Go ahead.
It's going to be a long journey to say.
Oh, it is literally, especially because we're doing this podcast bi-weekly. We're going to be here a while.
In for the long haul.
I suggested initially that we do this podcast weekly, and Kevin was like, I don't think you can watch a movie a week, Breanna. And I was like, I guess.
It's not wrong, though. Not wrong.
I could watch one movie a week. Would I get anything else done? I don't know.
Yeah.
I
But
would
then
watch actually.
also,
I would watch a lot of TikTok because I do watch a lot of TikTok regardless.
that, I mean, that is the most productive way to spend time, of course, as we all know. But once we get like later into this, when the shows start showing up, that would be difficult to do
Yeah,
in a
we
week.
still have to figure out, and I think it'll be different show by show, like how we split that. Like, is it going to be 2
Of
episodes? Is it
course,
going to be 4 episodes? And are we going to like watch ahead so that we're prepared for the podcast ahead of time? I don't know. We'll figure it out much later. I think it's like a year until we start hitting the shows.
at the pace at which we're going, roughly, yes.
We'll make it. We'll make it eventually.
Yeah.
This is gonna have to be, especially like I said, I'm not really. I've been talking about getting into Marvel for a long time, and I just Marvel and Star Wars are like the two things that are just like.
Star Wars, I can understand because it's pretty divisive at the minute, but on the whole, I think Marvel have been. I mean, this is me shilling already right off the bat.
Right off the fangirl and right here. Go ahead, fangirl.
Just no. Just I think they've just been surprisingly, remarkably consistent for the most part.
What I'm hearing is I love Marvel so much. Everybody should love it.
Did it seep through?
Yeah,
that
really
easy?
did.
Wow. Oh, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Everybody, buckle up.
Yeah, strap in. It's okay. I'll bring. Actually, I was gonna say I'll bring the hate, but yeah, I'm not much of a hater in general, so I don't think I will. Don't want to set unrealistic expectations. Okay. Spoiler-free thoughts on Iron Man. I'll go first since this is kind of my first time watching it, not fully, but I didn't really want to be there the first time, and my family made me go because I was a kid. So I did enjoy it. I think that there are clearly some things that don't hold up any longer, like in terms of like some sexism stuff. But I'm not going to harp on it too much because obviously it's a product of its time. It's also slightly a product of like the character that Tony Stark is, and I appreciate that as well. So I do think that like there were sometimes that was like almost a little bit too much for me. But for the like on the whole, like I think I kind of understand that that's just who he is as well. So, um, I think it was a pretty good movie. I think that it kind of feels like just one of those action films to throw on and not like super pay attention. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't have to be like super invested to understand everything that's going on.
Okay.
I don't know. So it was good. Not the best show I've ever seen, but good. What are your spoiler-free general thoughts of Iron Man?
It's going to be difficult because I have to sort of temper. Because for clarification, because I don't think I've said this, I have seen everything in the MCU. I'm up to date, up to speed, all the shows, everything. So this is sort of more retrospective for me and sort of being a bit of a guide as well for Bree, should any questions come up along the way as well. I look at this and I have to have a very particular lens on if I'm viewing it in a singular sense. Because obviously with the additional context of everything that comes after this point, it kind of changes how I view this film. I think what I'll say, even if I do view it singularly, I think it does a very good job of being a foundation for something that clearly has a lot of potential. And I mean that in every sense of the word, whether it is from a business perspective in terms of marketing and merchandise and everything. They do a very good job of making Iron Man / Tony Stark a very alluring character for men, or most men, I suppose. He is, as you said, a little bit sexist and a little bit of an egotist. And I say a little bit, I mean a lot. But I still think that there's that bravado and charisma that he has
Mhm.
that isn't inherently linked to the sexism or the ego. That is it. It's charming. I think, and obviously the Iron Man suits are really cool. I think there are maybe issues with, like, again, not only the sexism and stuff, but there is an argument to be made about depictions of like the Middle East and stuff.
Mhm.
But I still think that without spoilers, the confines of the story and the reveals that happen in the second half, they do kind of help to quell those concerns a little bit, which we can talk about more in a little bit, I suppose. But no, I think it's really good. I think that the visual effects hold up surprisingly well for a film that came out 15 years ago now. So yeah, I still love it. I like you went to see it when it was in theaters, and it's one of the films that I think I am happiest to go back to.
Mm.
Whether that's necessarily specifically down to the quality of the film itself or just the nostalgia that is inherently ingrained in me now, that I like to go back to the beginning, as most people do with stuff that they love, and to
Yeah.
revisit where it all began, so to speak. That's difficult for me to distinguish, and I don't have an answer, but it's
Yeah.
still reflective of how I feel. So good.
Good. Well, I think that we're just gonna kind of like, if you're here, I'm kind of hoping, and it's also kind of an older film, so either you watched it or you're trying to get into it like I am, and then you would have hopefully now watched it at this point. So we could just kind of like jump in. We have a few topics that we can hit on. The first one I want to hit on is the through line story discussion. That's one of the topics that we want to cover each time. The reason I want to
Yeah.
cover that is because, from my perspective, there's not too much here besides the Agents of Shield. And I didn't even realize that when I watched it the first time. The only reason I saw it and I like understand it now is because I know that Agents of Shield are a thing. And when the
Mm-hmm.
guy was like, "Yeah, we've abbreviated our name now. You can just call us Shield." And I was like, "Oh my god, I
Oh,
know
he did the thing. Oh.
that." So I think that's the only through line, excuse me, that I caught. I'm sure there's more besides obviously like Iron Man being a through line,
Yeah, that
but
he'll come back. Shocker. Um,
maybe in Iron Man 2, who knows?
don't. That's a hell of a prediction. I'm
Spoilers.
not sure. Wouldn't bet money on that. Yeah, I think that is relatively correct. There are obviously things that will come back in far more subtle ways, but I think in terms of continuing narratives and world building and stuff, though, that is the main thing. The only other thing that is potentially worth pointing out is it's a very brief moment in the film, but towards the end, Rhodey, Tony Stark's friend, does sort of take a glance at this prototype all silver Iron Man suit, and he says, like, next time,
Mm-hmm.
next time, which is clearly just a throwaway moment in this film, but it gives you the idea that maybe Rhodey will not only return but will have some semblance of character progression and upgrades, if I dare say. And to be fair, excuse me for this, but I must ask, because it is something that seems rudimentary to somebody like me, but for somebody who is maybe on the outside, isn't overly aware of. Are you up to speed with the concept of post-credit scenes in terms of Marvel specifically?
Yes.
Okay,
I think so. So let me explain, and if I'm wrong, feel free to tell me.
of
So from
course.
what I understand of like what's going on with the post like the post-credit scenes is they're hints to like what's coming next in terms of the story. Like a lot of the times either the next movie that's coming out will have like it'll be like a reference to the next movie, or an upcoming film maybe a few down the line. And there's always a post-credit scene. That's about as much as I know. So
you are both correct and incorrect at the same time.
Okay.
So you are pretty much on the money. I'm being facetious for the most part. Every Marvel film, with one exception, does have at least one post-credit scene. I think for the first phase, because there are, for people that don't know, I'll give a bit of context. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is broken up into 4 phases currently. We have just launched phase 5 this year, and they are essentially intended to kind of be not mini story arcs that are self-contained, but are kind of like chapters in a book where they are incrementally building up storylines leading to a big culmination. And we had that big culmination in one form or another at the end of phase 3. And we've sort of been rebuilding since. So we're in phase 1. And for phase 1, as far as I can remember, obviously we haven't watched everything in phase 1 yet. We've only just begun. But I think there's only one post-credit scene per film that is directly at the end. When we get a little bit further in, there is usually a scene in the middle of the credits and then a scene at the end of the credits. That it's interchangeable. One of them is typically more of a joke or a continuation of a funny scene or something, almost like a deleted scene, but not as behind the scenes content-y as a deleted scene. It is an actual well shot, produced, visual effects done scene. And then, as you said, typically the one at the very end of the credits is a setup for whatever next project is coming out. So my question being, that was a long-winded way to get there, but we're all caught up now. We understand. Did you see the post-credit scene at the end of Iron Man?
Yes, I did.
Excellent.
I did. With the guy, he said his name and I immediately forgot. It went in one ear and out the other. But he's like, we're from the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I was like, oh, okay, cool.
It's good old Samuel L. Jackson. And that ties into the through line thing, really, which is sort of why I touched upon this in the first place. His character is very important going forwards. And he says in this post-credit scene that he is he alludes to the fact that there are other heroes out there and that he is building something, which is, just leaving little breadcrumbs for you, Brie. I wonder what he's alluding to.
And okay, so I have a question for you, but I don't want you to tell me what it is, but I'm just answering the question directly. Is there other things that are like super obviously references to something when you've seen the other films? Like sort of like Easter eggs?
You mean in future films, are there Easter eggs that are
No, in this film specifically. In this film specifically, is there stuff that's like being referenced? Like let's say I've seen like all of this. You're like rewatching Iron Man and you're like, oh, this is clearly a reference to XYZ that happens in a future film.
In terms of
Besides
like
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
general setup, yes.
Okay.
Not necessarily in this film exactly. But yeah, like you'll see something that might not necessarily have tons of context within the film itself, but then it sort of, ties itself up in a neat little bow in a future thing. But they're never typically that far away. It's always usually the subsequent project, or maybe at most the one after that, where threads get closed up. So
Okay.
you
And
shouldn't
then
ever
this
have
is
too long to wait.
okay. And this isn't like this is chronologically speaking, this is definitely not the first film, right? Like in
No,
terms of
it
our chronological like release
yes, it
order,
was
this
the
is the
first
first.
MCU film released,
But in
but
terms of
in
like
terms of
chronological MCU, it's not the
there will
first.
be lots of, well, not lots, but there are a good number of projects that are set timeline wise before this.
Okay. 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 Interesting.
And they'll
Have
be
you ever
obvious when they are.
like gone through and watched it in chronological order rather than release order?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, oh,
How many times have
oh,
you
oh,
seen all these
sweet,
films?
dear sweet Brie. Oh, dear sweet Brie. Oh, my sweet summer child. Um, I have, I don't even want to guess a number for the amount of times I've seen each and every one of these films. Um, I have watched it in so many different viewing orders to not necessarily off of my own back, but I've seen somebody put a recommended viewing order for a particular thing. I'm like, I kind of want to do that, and then I do that, and I don't regret any of it. So I have done a chronological watch, not up to current day. You know, that was this is going back a few years, so there are some
Mm,
projects that would have been slotted in at different points. Um, but yeah, no, I've done that. I've done that.
okay. That's cool.
Yeah.
Is like release order like so release order I know is the best way to get into it, but is it the best like watching experience or would you say there's other
Yes.
orders? Okay.
Yeah. Um, like chronologically, you would think would make a lot of sense, but the way that Marvel works, it just doesn't quite pan out that way. Particularly with stuff like post-credit scenes as well, where they are setting up subsequent projects. The subsequent projects aren't necessarily directly linked to that film. A lot of the time they are, but more often than not, they are just setting up whatever the next project is that comes out, even if it's a completely different set of characters.
Mm,
They just give you a little tease. So you're like, oh, I need to go and see that next thing that comes out. So if you do it in chronological order, as much as in terms of the films themselves, for the most part, there isn't too much confusion. There are still references in films that are technically prequels that you'll only really appreciate if you know what they are inferring in the future timeline wise, but in the past in terms of the films that came before it, if that makes sense.
yeah.
And obviously the post-credit scenes could technically spoil some things that you shouldn't know yet
Oh, okay.
if you watch it in chronological order. So release order is best. They are very, even if it jumps back in time, as I say, they are very transparent that it is happening in the past, and they are very good at sort of time stamping when certain events happen. So
Mm, okay.
release order is the way.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad that we're watching it the best way then.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay. We have a couple other topics that we can cover. Let's go ahead. Let's talk about the soundtrack. That one shouldn't be
Yes.
too in depth, so let's do that one.
Uh-huh.
I thought the soundtrack was pretty good. It felt like almost like a little time capsule of songs that were
Yeah.
like popular at the time. And I like knew most of the songs, I believe, just like from outside of the film. In terms of the soundtrack, so I listened to the movie with my I have Skull Candy Crushers, and they're like super bass heavy and they can be equalized specifically for films. So it was really awesome experience. All of the little sound effects that they do for like for the different like machines and everything are really fantastic. Like I think that the people that did like the actual sounds did a really
Mm.
wonderful job. The soundtrack feels like a little bit it's kind of generic, but it also feels like super appropriate for who Tony Stark is as a character as well. So it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's generic, like the songs of the time, but it's also like he just kind of is like a fuckboy. So like that is what he would listen to anyways. So good either way. Thought it was a good
Yeah.
soundtrack.
I'm with you pretty much. I think with a lot of, I mean, it just films in general, I suppose, but particularly with most Marvel projects going forward, it's kind of like a case of looking at the licensed music that they use and the original score.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for the most part, there are notable exceptions, which will become obvious when we get to them, where the original score is kind of lacking. And I would say that's the case here. There isn't really any memorable tracks on the score itself. But in terms of licensing music with ACDC and things like that, as you said, I'm glad you said it because it's just it it clicks for me. It's like that makes perfect sense
Mm-hmm.
when sort of Back in Black and stuff starts playing. You're like, well, that just it feels right for
Mm-hmm.
the action that it is matching on screen. Um, so yeah, I and I think that helps not only in for me to enjoy the film moment to moment, but I also think that it makes me appreciate and grasp Tony Stark as a character better. Because it kind of feels like, as much as you're watching a film about him, he is the main character. Even like the music choices and the set design and just all the different elements of the film kind of feel like they're just engrossing you in his persona.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's really cool in my opinion. It's not often that I feel that the film as a whole, devoid of the main character, still feels like the main character.
Yeah, it really
Um,
does.
so yeah, I have to give kudos to it. It's not necessarily my type of music by any stretch of the imagination. Um, and I do wish that he kind of had, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, Bree, so be prepared for a broken
Okay.
record. I
Strap,
wish he
strapping in.
had a good hero theme.
Mm.
Um, and by that, if people don't know, it's like a piece of music that is specifically his that plays at least a few times throughout each of his films. Where even let's say he shows up in a film that isn't an Iron Man film, you should hear the music that is preceding his entrance, and you know that Iron Man is coming.
Yes. One
He
of the most
doesn't
popular
have that.
soundtracks that does that is Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
Lord of the Rings
exactly,
does that
exactly.
extremely in depth, where
Yep,
there is a theme for almost every type of character, even or type of enemy, even. And
yep,
so you know what's coming if you know the soundtrack well enough. So I
yeah,
was kind of looking out for that because I was kind of hoping there would be something, but it just kind of
yeah.
felt like generic Marvel soundtrack to me.
And that is, as I say, it's going to be the case quite often. They do get better as time goes on. I think a lot of the newer projects have remarkably better scores, and they do, for the most part, have hero themes that are memorable
Mm.
and good as well. Uh, and Iron Man does kind of get one, but it's not obviously in this film, which is disappointing. I get that this is like real bare bones stuff. They are setting the foundation for things to come. Um, but I guess they're kind of using the licensed music in this film particularly as a crutch,
Mhm.
um, so that we're more just thinking, oh, that was awesome when he did that thing to that line from that ACDC song, than thinking, wow, this piece of music that I've never heard before. Every time I hear that now, I'm going to think of Iron Man.
Yeah, it's kind
Um,
of a missed opportunity, honestly. Like they should
yeah,
have
no, it
like
is
invested a little
absolutely.
bit. Um, oh well, too late now.
It
Too late
is.
now. So decent soundtrack.
Yeah, yeah, it's not
um,
bad.
yeah, for sure. I've definitely heard worse soundtracks. Um, in terms of like themes, are there any themes that you kind of wanted to cover? I know that's kind of like a generic topic, but like themes of the film. I think the first one that for me comes to mind is like I guess, and this kind of ties into because I did want to cover like the Bechdel test stuff. This movie 100% does not pass the Bechdel test, as I know most
You
Marvel
don't
movies.
say.
most Marvel movies don't. And for anybody that doesn't know, the Bechdel test is a measurement of representation of women in film, and just like in general, like any kind of fiction, books, movies, TV shows, whatever. It basically is if there's two women on. Is there two women on screen? Is the first question. Are they both named characters? And are they talking about something else that is not romance or a man? And I think that there is like one and like maybe a half named characters, named female characters in this film. And they don't talk to each other besides at the very beginning when she's like, "Oh, I'm taking the trash out." So
Yeah.
clearly doesn't pass the Bechdel test. um so yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about the theme because like I think that almost like as I've been thinking about it, I feel like Tony Stark himself, like as a character, isn't like overly sexist. I think it's the way that the rest of the movie is handled around it that kind of made it egregious for me. Is that like I understand like Tony Stark's character, and I feel like that can almost be separated where he's having personal growth, he's having like those moments of change, but we should have been able to see that juxtaposed from like how actual life is, and like we should have been able to have like strong female characters outside of that, and I think that that was the missed opportunity for me. So
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And that doesn't change anytime soon.
no, I don't even know if it's
But
changed
it
much
does.
currently. I know there
It,
are some films that
it's
pass the Bechdel
gotten
test now, but
in terms of the Bechdel test, maybe not, but in terms of like the female representation, it has gotten remarkably better. There's still obviously, as there always is, plenty more to do and room to grow and improve. But compared to this kind of stuff, it's night and day, really. In terms of themes, not necessarily relating directly to his sort of macho, pseudo sexist persona, but I think just a general sense of self-reflection and reinvention is something that is always on my mind when I watch this film. I think that it's not necessarily super clear on the surface level, but the concept that he is living this life of decadence to begin with, and he is so nonchalant just due to the sheer scale of his privilege that it takes something like this sort of harsh, rude awakening, and not even seeing how the other half live. That's not necessarily the right turn of phrase, but the idea that his actions have consequences, and the consequences are being inflicted on people that he would usually consider the lowest common denominator. It's satisfying to me, not only in the sense of I want to see this character redeem himself, but also, you know, not to get overly political or current, but it is kind of like the concept of just the billionaire in our world today. It's they are capable of so much good, but because they are very privileged and comfortable in their lives, they seem to believe that living in some naivety to not only their ability to do something, but also the consequences of their inaction, and their laissez-faire attitude, even more so with Tony Stark sort of losing some of his weapons to the enemy and even selling them to them, you know, dealing to both sides of the table, as they put it in the film. I just, not only do I think it's done really well in this film, but I think it sets Tony on a path even this early on that might not be super visible from this film alone, But it's worth noting that idea that from the moment that Tony is captured and he sees that his weapons are being used on, like those families in these just completely ravaged villages, that is something that doesn't ever leave him, and I think informs his entire personality and character arc going on through every single project that he appears in post this point. So yeah, I think that's the main theme that I touch on, that reflection and sort of reinvention in the face of adversity. And that's universally applicable. Like, everybody should be introspective and consider the consequences of their actions, and realize that if they're hurting someone, even if they aren't receiving any impact from that hurt, they should stop hurting people, and do what they can to make things right. I think
feel like
it's not necessarily sophisticated by any means, but it's executed well.
Yeah. I think the extra layer for me to it is that, like, that has to be really difficult to face for somebody like Tony Stark, who has this ego, who's really confident. I feel like it has to be something so difficult to face that not only are you doing harm, but you're doing a lot of harm. Like, this is like some pretty extensive damage to many, many, many countries and people and lives, and like, literally, who knows how many deaths are affected by his decisions, or were affected, I guess, by his decisions, and will continue to be, because Stark Industries hasn't just stopped existing. The weapons haven't just stopped existing. So I think that the fact that he was able to face that he did cause all that harm in the first place, let alone do something about it, I think says a lot about his character, because I can't imagine trying to face that kind of damage. Like I hurt somebody's feelings one time and I'm ready to cry. Like, I'm not getting people killed or anything. I'm just like, I just hurt somebody's feelings and I'm like done for the day. I'm like, I can't deal with it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a lot to say.
And like, he is a deeply unlikable character at the start of the film, and that's why we like him, because he is almost so eccentric and over the top in his bravado that it's just sort of enrapturing to watch. And also, to give kudos, because I haven't done it yet, but Robert Downey Jr. is just perfectly cast in the role.
Absolutely.
Knocks it out of the park. But I think, touching on all of the themes that we've talked about, it's the idea that even though that bravado and that persona is still there, because it's a cornerstone part of his personality, and it's sort of learned behavior, you can kind of see towards the end of the film that what is there is actually being used as more of a shield than a dismissive, I'm all that and you mean nothing to me thing.
Yeah.
We think he's very shallow to begin with, and he is, but I think that by the end of it we gain a bit more context to maybe understand that it's not necessarily fully an act, but there is some sort of amping up of those elements of his personality, because that's where he feels comfortable. And the rest of the film kind of shakes him out of that comfort zone. And though he retreats back into it, maybe there's room for the cracks in that armor to sort of start growing a little bit bigger as time goes on.
Absolutely. The other thing that I think that I just wanted to briefly touch on, that I was noticing as I was watching this, and I my suspicion, having not seen most of these films, is that most of the films follow it, but this was definitely following the hero's journey almost beat for beat, and a lot of films do. But there was like the whole like call to action, refusal of the call, like the help of the mentor, like all of that stuff. And I'm not necessarily surprised, but I thought it was worth calling out. And I'm interested to see how many of the films follow that arc, because it's very popular.
It's not a uncommon theme. We'll put it like that.
I mean, it seems to
There
go
are
hand in hand with like hero stories and
yeah. I think it's
hero's
inevitable to a
journey,
certain extent, but there are deviations, and I think even within that, not that you said that there wasn't, but it's worth keeping in mind that even though there are, as you said, countless films that use that arc, there are still interesting ways to play around within
Oh, absolutely.
that specific journey. So,
There's a
yeah,
reason why a lot of films use it, and it's because it works. It's a story arc that works. It's a story arc we're familiar with,
yep.
and is comfortable. And because of that comfortability, it can be used to shake things up as well. So, yeah, I think it was worth calling out. Is there any other themes that you wanted to chat about? I was trying to think if there was anything else. I feel like there was, but my brain's not remembering. So,
Themes, not necessarily, not any that are like overtly worth pointing out. I will give a shout out to Pepper. I know that as a character, she's not quite there yet, but I still appreciate the fact that, and I wrote this down in my notes that I made quite a while ago on one of my rewatches, but she is a woman who obviously waits on Tony, but she doesn't wait for him. You know, she is still very much proactive within a, to be fair, subservient role. You know, she is essentially an assistant and a caretaker, for want of a better word, to Tony. But at the same time, she isn't completely helpless. She is shown as a very competent, intelligent woman. And though not much use is made of her, and she is often the butt of a joke, or she is used as the object of Tony's desires. I still think that there is some kudos to be given there, because I think it could have very easily just been she is this ditzy woman who is, oh my god, you're flying around in a suit, oh my god, I love him so much. But they don't do that. And obviously they have the precedent of the comics that isn't what the characters like in the comics, but still, to make, you know, a blockbuster 4-quadrant film and not sort of pander to that kind of trope is it's commendable. There is obviously still room for that character to improve, but worth shouting out, I think, the one semi-decent female character that they do have.
Yeah, I did enjoy her character, and I thought she was pretty funny, and I liked the moments that she had. I think that she is aware of her role and that she is able to operate well within her set role still. Like she like kind of follows the like I'll do what I'm told, but also like I'm gonna do it my way.
Yeah.
And if you ask me to do something I don't want to do, I'm just not gonna do it. I will say the one thing that really bothered me, and we can kind of like transition into talking about a bunch of different characters, whatever. But the one thing that really bothered me was that like when she was running away from I can't even remember his name, the bad guy in the suit. When she was running, I was like, okay, like I know this is a film, but also like girls know how to run in heels, and I'm sure she could have ran so much faster. Like they did her a disservice there where she was like, ah, like kind of doing that like silly run. I was like, if I needed to run in heels like that, I would one either be taking them off, or if I couldn't, like if my brain wasn't working, I can run in heels. So I would be going
Yeah.
way faster than that. So that did kind of bug me, but obviously a nitpick, and it did crack me up. So
yeah, it's one of the unfortunate byproducts of needing to build tension within a scene, you know, to keep
oh,
her
I think it would have been
within
way funnier if she was
perils
just like,
wits.
ah! Just
Oh
like
no, if she just pegged it and disappeared for the rest of the film,
funny.
that would be excellent.
Oh, that would have been
But
good.
no, she not that she needed to be saved necessarily. Obviously,
No.
Iron Man does come in at that point to to help her, but she is again in that final fight taking a proactive role, and technically is the person that brings him down, brings the bad guy down. So yeah, there's positives and negatives to what they had Pepper do in this film, that's for sure.
Yeah, always. Is there any other characters that you wanted to touch on? I know we kind of have like briefly touched on everybody, but
I mean, Obadiah, I don't think we really need to touch on him. Love me some Jeff Bridges, don't get me wrong, but just kind of generic.
Generic bad guy. You think
Yeah,
he's
and
good and then he's not.
his motivations just didn't and still don't really make all that much sense. In terms of sort of wanting to take over the company and have the technology and stuff, that's all fine. But in terms of his methodology of how he tries to go about that by hiring the terrorist group to kidnap Tony and stuff, it's just sort of, surely you could have just, gone down into his workshop and shot him or something. There's so many easier ways to do that. It seems so convoluted. Again, they need to set up plot and tension and have a 3-act structure and whatnot. But
How else would he have
it's
learned
just,
differently, besides
yeah,
being held
yeah.
captive for 3 months, I guess.
And then out of nowhere, he has this thing that can like paralyze you with a
Oh yeah.
noise. It's just,
Don't you just love
okay.
that when this isn't something that shows up a ton in like sci-fi based films, but like in fantasy, this is very much a rule. If you're going to use something, you need to set it up at the beginning. And just pulling out this tool that just like, and they kind of set it up before he used it on Tony, but like still they didn't explain like before that, like, oh, this was like like they could have easily done a scene at the beginning of the film, like, hey, this, like, we're not going to use this. Like, it could have been an easy, like, meeting with the government, like, hey, we're not going to use this technology. We don't think it's useful, that kind of thing.
Or
And then
that,
it comes
like,
back later. Like,
or that Obadiah was pitching this new piece of tech in a board meeting and it got rejected because it's too dangerous. And it's like that would have worked. And we would have, you could have actually given us the exposition in that scene of specifically what it does. And they didn't do that. So we're just like, oh, it paralyzes them and it makes them go all blue and veiny for some reason. Okay, I guess. But yeah, that's really it for Obadiah.
Definitely breaking.
Again,
I know it's not magic, but this is definitely breaking one of the laws of magic. So
yeah. And really the only other character, I guess, that's worth any kind of mention is Rhodey. But again,
I thought he was kind of mean.
Not really.
I'm just hoping, because he did have some like development at the end, but I didn't really enjoy the development because he was like so like mean at the beginning, where he's like, he was also like, I just want war to happen, basically. And yes, you're allowed to change your mind, but also it didn't really feel like he changed his mind. It just felt like, I need help right now. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he's very militaristic, and he's loyal and sort of very driven in terms of following orders and doing things by the book, which is the through line for his character in general. But it's just that it kind of almost feels like he's just doing the same thing over and over in this film, where Tony does something and then he's having a phone call with him and he's like, what, did you do that thing? And Tony's like, well, no, it wasn't me. Okay, maybe it was me. And he's like, Tony. That just feels like that happens 2 or 3 times in this film. And that's kind of the extent of his character, that he's there to chastise Tony, which is fine, but it's just that character could be a lot more, and they just don't really do much with him. The one thing that I will say is that they do kind of set a good groundwork for the dynamic between him and Tony, that they are very standoffish, but at the same time they are very good friends, and can have some sort of pokes and fun at each other and stuff like that. So like that's nice, but I would have liked to have seen more of it, really.
Yeah. I would have liked to see some depth of character as well. I thought that was definitely a miss. Not that like there weren't good moments, but at the same time, like I don't know. Like I think I just wanted something more from the character and I didn't really connect with the character.
Yeah.
So oh well. I'm assuming that he will get more development later. And maybe I'll connect with him later. Maybe.
Who knows?
Who knows? You know, I don't.
I do know.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else that you wanted to say about the overall story of the movie? Any like story beats that we missed? Any themes we missed? Any characters we missed? Anything like that? That you were like, I really wanted to talk about this.
Not really. I think that the only thing that I'll touch on, which is it would be self-evident if anybody's seen the film, but I think is worth mentioning, that just sort of helps to round out the discussion of Tony as a character, is that very naturally the film establishes that, or at least to begin with, it's kind of, you get the vibe that Tony has just sort of stumbled into all of this privilege and wealth. They talk about Howard, his father, sort of establishing Stark Industries and building up this legacy, and he became this, he inherited all of the company and all of the wealth and whatnot. But then when he's in the cave, we do actually see that he is a very, very talented engineer and mechanic, and he is very tech savvy. He's incredibly smart, which is, I think, is a really interesting contrast to this egocentric persona that he puts on, where, not that those two are necessarily never mutually exclusive.
I mean,
but,
I think you could make an argument that terrible men are terrible at everything. So.
Absolutely. But typically you are either kind of one or the other. You're either the knobhead at the top that is telling the tech guys what to do, or you're the tech guy who is sort of kind of unwillingly following the orders of the head honcho, who is the egotist and whatnot. And Tony is kind of both simultaneously, which isn't exclusive to him or unique to him as a character, but I think is something that is often overlooked. That yes, he is very he's a very blunt character to engage with, because either you're going to kind of vibe with his personality or you're not. But there is, even within this first film, a remarkable amount of depth, not only in terms of the writing of the character and whatnot, but also the performance. I think both go hand in hand to sort of really create a three-dimensional character, even though many aspects of his personality seem two-dimensional on the surface.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, 3 things that I wanted to touch. One was a question. So it was briefly mentioned, and I couldn't tell if I just wasn't understanding what he said correctly, but the whatever Obadiah, I don't, no, not him. Wait, is that his name? I don't remember. The bad guy, main bad guy.
Yeah,
whatever.
Obadiah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So he mentioned that his dad invented nuclear bombs. Did I not hear that correctly? Or is that correct?
I can't directly confirm that. I don't remember him specifically saying that. It could very well be that there was a line where he talked about,
like, where he was like, well, imagine if your dad was selfish, then we wouldn't have nuclear bombs or something like that. Maybe I misheard something.
I mean, Howard, like, I'm trying to think now to other times that it's sort of been raised. Um, Howard worked on a lot of things, so I suppose it is highly possible that he was involved in like the Manhattan Project to some extent. Um, I, again, without spoilers, wouldn't necessarily peg him as the kind of guy who would
Yeah,
do
that's why I
something
was
like that.
confused because I was like the timeline of like when nuclear bombs were invented and how old like his dad would have had to be like doesn't necessarily make sense in my head, which is why I think I got confused and I was like, did I hear that correctly? I don't know. Somebody in the
Howard
comments can let me
Howard
know.
was Howard was relatively active, sort of um, 30s in his 30s in World War II.
Really? So when is this
Yeah,
happening then? Because he would have had to be super old.
well, in the timeline of Iron Man 1, Howard
Yeah.
Stark is already dead.
Right.
Um,
But when he had a kid, he would have had to be like fairly old. Do you see what I'm
um,
saying?
yeah, he would have been older for sure.
What
He
do you
definitely
know
didn't have a
what
child
year
young.
Iron Man takes place? Do we know that?
I'm almost certain it is in 2008.
It's not. It actually takes place in the year 2010.
Okay.
Just Googled it. So then we're talking about like if he was like active in World War II. Do you see what I'm saying? Like the timeline doesn't make
Yeah.
sense in my head, but I guess it doesn't super matter. It's just the question I had. The other thing I was gonna say, do you not feel like at the very beginning of the film, like I feel like Tony Stark would have been the type of person that had like a how to date women class. Like I feel like he would have had like a how to get with women. Just an
Um,
observation.
I get it. I think Tony would be reluctant to share the kind of knowledge that he might have in that field with other people.
Yes.
He just
But I
wants it for
think
himself.
he could have. He could have done one of those awful classes that people
Oh, he could have. He
uh
definitely has the capacity to, but I think he just wants all the fish in the ocean for himself.
I see. The other thing that I wanted to comment on was the length of the film. I was actually really
Hmm.
shocked when I saw it's like just over 2 hours, I think.
Hmm.
Um, which was really shocking to me because one, I don't remember it being that long the first time I watched it. And two, it feels like I'm really surprised that they put that much investment in the first film. It's like, yeah, they have all these plans. Yeah, there's so much coming and they think it's going to be great. But the fact that they actually invested that much in the very first film, I think is a little surprising to me.
Yeah, it's something I reiterated multiple times throughout the years to various people, but the fact that the MCU even exists is kind of some anomaly, miracle, hybrid that
Mhm.
they've even managed to execute it up to this point. But that does begin with having the guts to just,
Invest.
come right out of the gate swinging for the fences.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what they did, and it paid off.
Yeah.
Not that Iron Man performed incredibly well. It's not, in the top 20 films of all time or anything. Um, Nothing crazy, but it succeeded, and it got us to where we are now in a roundabout way, which you don't know where we are right now, but you will
No, I'm
in
lost.
10 years time.
We'll make it. Maybe.
We'll see.
You know my track record, so I guess we'll see.
You finished this film. That is something. I'll take it. It's
I
a win.
almost didn't.
There are 41 projects in total, so 40 more to go.
Oh god.
Um,
Okay.
and that's even
Um
just the ones that are currently out. There are more on the way soon. The number
it never
increases all the
ends.
time, Bree.
It never ends. I do want to point out briefly. It's not super relevant this episode, but I would like to do a ranking list, and I think it's okay to do our rankings separately. So that way we have like our own little ranking list. Obviously, both of our lists right now is going to be number 1 Iron Man. There's nothing else there. My prediction is that I will keep Iron Man number 1 and Hulk will be number 2. That's my prediction. So,
Okay.
I'm not really looking forward to this next one. But oh well.
You'll be fine. It's great. I assure you.
I will be okay. I will be.
One
I
of the
will
absolute best
survive.
ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. Really quickly, where can people find you?
People can find me on the Twitters at Samhini. That's HEANEY. I retweet a lot of Marvel stuff. It gets really obnoxious.
Mm-hmm. It is very obnoxious. I'm like, again, just kidding. I go on Twitter like once a week.
Don't confirm my false insults towards myself. That's not good. Where can people find you, Brie?
You can find me at Fabulous Breanna. I am technically on Twitter. I don't really. The only thing I've been retweeting recently is they're doing. There's a new Aragon book coming out. They're finally doing book 5. Christopher Paolini finally wrote book 5. I'm so excited about it. So that's all I've been doing on Twitter. Other than that, you can find me on TikTok. You can find me on Twitch. You can find me on Instagram. Yeah. That's where you can find me. And I did want to give a huge thank you to our patrons. So I'm just going to name them really quick. So our patrons currently are Bucky Blue, Hoppel, Alpaca Tom, Aman, Fabulous Brianna, Brianna's mom, Brianna's brother, Brianna's wife, Nikolai at Night, Cypher Primus, Brendan Myers, Marcus O'Neill, Lillian, Mimi J, The Snack Network, David Hotwright, Dave Harp, and the Xbox Expansion Pass. Thank you guys so much for your support. Really appreciate you guys like so much, especially myself. You know what I mean?
It means a lot.
It does. It does mean a lot when I support myself. So,
as everyone should, support yourselves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's the takeaway from today. If you took anything away from this, support yourself.
Yeah. Who cares about Marvel? Support yourself.
I think you care about Marvel. Okay.
No comment.
No comment. Okay. Well, we will say goodbye, but thanks for hanging out with us.